Hey, Quants. Today we're going to catch up with something Andrew Karpathy had just put out and also something that Theo was putting out on his YouTube channel. And spoiler alert, they're finally catching up to my workflows. That is a little bit of a hyperbole there. However, it is interesting that I thought people were already on this concept of using your AI agents in individual threads or channels in the way that you generally would communicate with people already, and then also potentially exposing those agents to be used for by other individuals that are in that thread as well. And that's how I've been using it for quite a while now. And there are a few differences or nuances that they get into in each of these in each of the contexts here, and I'm going to get into that, but I just wanted to kind of touch on this because I thought it was quite interesting. So let's go ahead and jump into it. But before we do that, I'm just going to shill a few things here real quick. So the first thing is on the news brief. I've mentioned this before. You can come down and subscribe to the news briefs if you want to subscribe to the news briefs for QA or Quant Alchemy. It just recently included a filter here. So if you're interested in specific aspects that are mentioned in the news briefs, you can filter based on those comments and then go through and look at the individual posts for those specific briefs if you want to catch up on the historical briefs for those. Something that I got quite a lot of good feedback on in the Crown group was this recent update that I did to the Quant Companion. FYI, if you are using this, or not really an FYI, just a reminder that this is an open source project under the Quant Alchemy repository in GitHub. And so if this doesn't have the things that you like or need, or if there's something else that you want to add to this, it is open source code and you are free to go and take it, do whatever you want with it, submit pull requests. I'm open to reviewing some pull requests and potentially getting new features in here. But it came about as it had the basic functionality in terms of just providing the Monte Carlo simulation and some of the different metrics that you might want to look at for your strategies from TradingView. That information hasn't changed. You still have the ability to select individual files or all the files when you upload them. One thing that I did add is I added multiple defaults because it is a pain to have to go in and change your configuration every time that TradingView changes it. And so I did that because I'm not going to, as an open source project, I'm not going to update that every single time that TradingView changes. It's just too much work. But again, it's open source, so somebody else could easily issue a pull request. What this does is it allows the defaults to basically track the changes in TradingView. Of course, it's not going to track all the historical changes because I'm not staying that up to date with it when I use this, but the default V2, maybe I should put a date on there or something. Maybe that's something somebody wants to include as a pull request or an improvement. But if you are downloading the current version, it's been modified to use those headers. And so point is, you shouldn't need to create a new config or a remapping of the headers to be able to pull in your exported trades for further analysis. Now, the big piece that I added here was this invalidation lab. So somebody inside the Crown group was talking about doing a bunch of invalidation metrics. The whole point about this is not how is my strategy working, but is my strategy going to break, or trying to prove that it won't work. And then that way it's kind of taking the opposite side of the argument that you want to try to break your strategy and prove to yourself that it's not going to work, versus the opposite side of being overly optimistic about your strategy and assuming that it's going to work and looking for the validation that it's going to work moving forward. And so there's some links here you can look at. These pages don't match the branding. I've been thinking about updating the branding of this site anyways. And so this goes into the details of the different parts of the invalidation lab and some of the other things that I would like to add. Because this is just static data, there are other things that I would potentially need to add to be able to get more accurate invalidations, or some of the other aspects that I might use for invalidating a strategy. And so again, another future pull request potentially, if we can get access to some free data. I know there's ways to pull free data. It might not be as granular, but it might still work for a lot of individuals if you're just doing like daily time frame, maybe even probably not hourly time frame, but maybe. I haven't really looked around for data sources that granular, but again, same idea here. If I select one of these strategies, you're going to see what is wrong with that particular strategy. One of them in particular is looking at multiple uploaded results so that you can get a combination of how that strategy is working. This is under the assumption that you're applying the same strategy to the different time frames or the different uploads. They could all be on the same time frame. It would just potentially be different asset classes or different date ranges if you wanted to do that. But as you change this, you'll see this strategy is not upholding or is more easily invalidated than the other longer term time frame strategy. So just wanted to share that one as well if you're interested in seeing that. Now getting back onto what I've seen going out today. So Andrew Karpathy had this idea he's basically discussing this new release, which is, I believe it's called Slack tags. And it essentially is a way for individuals to use Claude within Slack with your teams. And so if you've ever used Slack, and it's been a while since I've used Slack, so I might miss some of this, but you have the ability to create different channels. And in each of those channels, you could essentially have a Claude agent in there proactively doing work. Or if you're working with multiple coworkers and you're like, oh, that's a good idea, let's go ahead and tell Claude to go do that and have that specific instance of Claude go do that. And so I don't know, my first impression, and there are some people defending this, his idea, I don't know why that was such a new novel strategy, because I feel like that was something that I heard multiple people talking about in the context of OpenClaw and also Hermes. And it's the way that I've been using OpenClaw for quite a while. And when I migrated over to using Hermes, full disclosure, I'm using, just a heads up on my workflow, I'm basically using only Hermes at this point. It just seemed to work better in terms of the ease of updating in that. Every time I would update OpenClaw, or every other time I would update OpenClaw, something would break, and then I'd end up having to open up Claude or Codex and say, hey, go fix it. And then it would, it was like, it would end up fixing it, but it'd end up costing me like an hour of time or something like that, just waiting to get this thing fixed. And then I was working with it again. And I have not experienced that with Hermes yet. Not that there won't necessarily be problems with Hermes. I think the OpenClaw might have just been an artifact of the popularity that it gained at such an early stage of its release. And I don't think that it was getting the attention to make sure that it was as solid as it was. And my understanding of the history of Hermes was basically being used by, I do not remember the laboratory that put it out, but basically they had been using it in their work environment for a while, and they saw OpenClaw and essentially said, oh, this is the same thing we've been using, but ours feels a little bit better. And so they opened it up for everybody. And I would say, yes, it just seems like it's been more refined. And so I've been using that more. But going back to what these guys are getting at, if you are using Telegram, which I personally don't use Telegram that much, but the idea is that you can use topics, or if you're using Discord, you could also use different channels in Discord. And one of the new features, and I really wasn't doing this with OpenClaw, but something that happens by default if you're using Hermes, when you speak to your agents, they will automatically open the conversation in a new thread, and then all that context is within that new thread. Having said that, you can still do that with OpenClaw. It just wasn't the default, and so I wasn't using that. I personally was not a huge fan of threads, because I feel like when I would use a thread, it would get lost. But with as much churn as I've been doing with communication with my agents and that inside Discord in particular, I found that giving the threads a shot, I do actually prefer using it in threads. And so one of the things about that, the nuances that I'll get into here that I think is pretty interesting is when you listen to Theo, if you go, and I'll have a link to Theo's video here so you can go watch his full video. He basically gives a breakdown of what Karpathy also said, and then how he's also been using a similar flow. His has kind of gone to another level. So he's spinning up different containers with agents and all the stuff that they need within that container, and then associating that to individual channels. Now, without knowing a little bit more about that, I don't think there's anything specific about that tied specifically to a channel. I believe it, and I have, maybe I'll link my previous video. It was one of the more popular videos that I did initially, which was how to create a Discord bot. So when you set these things up in Discord, for example, you have to create a Discord bot. And so you can limit that bot to a specific channel. They might be doing that. That's not the way that I use it. I do have multiple Hermes agents, for example, and then I just give them access to all the channels. And then I just find myself using one agent over another agent based on the personality and context that I've given them. And we'll get into that here in a little bit, but that's kind of the same thing that Theo has been doing, but he's describing creating a whole Docker container instance for each channel, which is a lot of infrastructure to set up. And so he goes into the detail of like how doing this with Slack is kind of like the first pass, and that would be easy, but then, you still have a lot of the abstraction that you probably need to get for doing the individual containerization and everything. One thing that he mentioned, and I totally agree with, one of the benefits of using something like Hermes over just going straight Claude is if you go to Claude, that's the only model you get. If you're using Hermes, you can use whatever model you want to hook up with Hermes, and that's a huge benefit. You'll hear a lot of people smarter than me talking about this that run companies much bigger than my own company, about how trying to if you lock yourself into a model, then you are creating a lot of risk for yourself in terms of your AI strategy. If Claude, for example, decides that they don't like, or Anthropic decides they don't like what you're doing, they can totally cut you off, and then they just ruins your business if your whole business was built on that single model. And so I don't think model lock-in is a good concept. Hermes is a way to help you prevent yourself from doing that. And I will mention just another key point that Theo talks about a lot, which I think is pretty novel. I won't say novel. I've actually talked about this in the context of harnesses. And the whole idea behind that is you can just, if you have both Codex and you also have Claude installed, for example, you can tell Hermes, hey, go use Claude, but use Claude-P to do that. And so that would essentially be telling Claude to use the command line to access, telling your agent to go access Claude through the command line to do something. So in the context of design work, that's where I would favor using Claude over something like Codex, I could still talk to Codex through my valid OAuth subscription without violating anything that Anthropic is not liking you to do or not wanting you to do, and still get the benefit of having the design flow through there. And so I don't think I mentioned this on any of the earlier videos, but that's another thing that came out, was that Anthropic was originally really hostile to anybody using their product in a harness. And so harnesses can have a large effect on how working with an agent looks and feels. I'll get on that in a little bit here based on some of the future work that I have coming up and video content that I'll be providing. But they recently went back on that and said if you're just using it through like with the -P workflow or something like that, then it's totally viable and that's fine. And so at least for now, again, this goes back to the model lock-in. That is an okay way to use things. Again, I would say you still want to be cautious with that because any change of the wind, Anthropic could decide that they don't like that again and then tell you not to use that and ban access through that. And then if you build your whole business based off of that, you're basically at the whims of another business telling you what you're allowed to do or not to do. All right, so I'm just briefly going to show one of my Discord channels here. And so the way that I have this set up here is I'm doing this with a private server, and so I have my own private server created up here, and then I create a bunch of different channels here. Let me see this view. If the screen is ever too small, please put a comment and let me know. I think the size of this is okay. I ran across this when I was doing some recording for the comparison against the different IDEs, and so I blew up those so that they would look a little bit bigger, but this I think looks okay. So moving forward, I have the multiple channels that I create. One thing that I'll oftentimes do, and I will create a channel for individual products that I use. So for example, Click Alchemy is one of the products that I released, and you can go use. I have the Quant Companion is not one in here because I haven't really been using it in that context, but I have this is technically Krong AI, but Crown AI application that I'm currently working on with Eric, and that should be coming out for beta access pretty soon. The Crown website, which is the Crown Quant Alchemy website that something I built a number of years ago to help facilitate accessing some of the products and also provide some affiliate attribution for myself. I've got the QA website, which is where I host the briefs. So my point about this is I create these individual channels and then I will message my Hermes agent if I want them to do some work in there. I don't always work in that context. If I'm at my computer, I prefer to use something like T3 Code, which I've mentioned, or the Cursor Agents IDE. And so that flow just seems to be faster. Sometimes prompting the agents like Hermes feels slow to me. The webhook flow that I described in my 2026 workflow, that webhook flow seems to happen pretty quick. They get the notifications quick, and then I get the pushes pretty quick. But I haven't instrumented it and timed it, and so I don't know if it's actually faster or if it just feels faster because I'm not sitting there watching it and I'm off doing other work. And so with that said, these channels, and this goes back to a difference between where you might see Theo doing something versus what I'm doing. Theo is actually doing an individual container per channel. And so with that said, that container is unlikely to be able to reach across to another aspect. And he mentioned he runs 3 different businesses. And so if he has that segregation, it makes sense that they might not want that risk. For my case, most of the products that I use, I want access to multiple, I want one product to have access to another product. And so I will it's very similar to the containerized instance. I will still give them access to both of that, but it's in their own container. And so in their own environment, they have access to the code. And then that way, if I'm working on the Crown AI application, for example, the Crown AI application has like this model switcher, and I've talked about what I'm going to do in Click Alchemy very soon. And so and I do go over this a little bit in Click Alchemy. I might say, hey, go look at the Crown, this particular component or this aspect of the Crown AI application or the Krong AI application that I already have built out, and utilize that concept and pull it into Click Alchemy so that I can use it there. And so that way, even though I'm working in the specific channel that I want to be working in, it will still have access to the other code that it needs access to. And so that's worked well for me. And that's how I've done it. I do have, like I said, I've got 3 different agents that I can call here. So Aries is one of the agents that I have. Athena is another agent that I have. And then Iris is the other agent that I have. And so these are all on their own instances, their own machines. And so they have the same level of segregation. A couple of them are physical machines, and then one of them is just like a cloud machine. But you could also do this through Dockerized containers or something like that, which is kind of what I understood Theo is doing, but I don't know where he's deploying it. So it could look very similar to just a cloud deployment type of setup. So, and then just he describes teaching them different things and using them different ways. I personally do that through kind of the soul file. So if you're using Hermes, you'll give it its own personality. And so each of my agents have their own personality, but they also are aware of each other because I've told them about each other. And so they're basically like coworkers, and they're aware of each other. There is one kind of nuance in here, and Discord in particular, where it will prevent bots from talking to bots. So if anybody has good solutions for this, I haven't found it, but if anybody has any good solutions for how to get a bot to talk to a bot inside Discord, I would be very interested in that. I've went through some hoops to try and make that happen, but I also understand the implications of not wanting that to occur, because you could have 2 bots talking to each other, and of course it costs money when you're burning through your tokens, whether that's a bleed down of your OAuth subscription limits, or your subscription limits through Codex, for example, or if it's using something where you're paying for API costs, then there potentially could be no cap unless you have limits set on there. And those agents might just like keep talking back and forth more than you want. And so that was one of the things that I started to play with, and then I didn't get very far. With that. But the idea was to have both of them. Hey, you're going to plan this out. You're the lead, and I want you to discuss it with this other individual. This other individual is the architectural person about that's going to understand all the nitty gritty, and they're going to ask questions about that. And you guys basically having like a project manager and an architect on a project, hash out all the details, and then when you're done, create the PRD. And that's kind of what I was coming together with, and then I would have my other agent go implement it, for example. And so I thought that would be kind of a fun idea to do. As I mentioned, I ran into some of the hiccups there. There probably is a way to get past it. I think you can disable some of those limitations in Discord, but I haven't got that far yet because I have other things that I need to work on. And that was something that I was playing with for a little while, and then I just got onto other things, but it's something I'll probably come back to. But if other people have other ideas that are already solved that, I think that'd be an interesting thing to know about. And so just real quick on the personalities, the reason I mention that is because I do tend to do that. I have Athena tends to be my designer agent. I like to use her for doing most of my design work, creating images. The whole redesign stuff that I did with Crown Quant Alchemy and Quant Alchemy and creating images, I actually gave her access to an API. I put caps on these, and so I segregate them. This gets a little bit into the security aspect of things, but she has access to an API key where she can go and create images from an AI model that is very good at creating images. In this case, I'm using Nano Banana Pro, Gemini Pro, which is essentially Nano Banana. And but I also put limits on there, spending limits. So if for some reason there was prompt injection issues or something like that, it's only, they could only, end up blasting like $20 worth of usage or something like that, because even creating 30 or 40 images costs less than $20. And so that's how one way. I haven't gone into everything about my security, but that's one way that I would help limit my agent from just running wild and end up costing me a ton of money. And so Iris is typically the developer. I use her for doing most of my development tasks. And then Aries kind of is the guy that I tend to use for doing a lot of my automated efforts and marketing aspects of things. And so I've given him restricted keys to access Google Ads, for example, so that he can review what I've been doing in Google Ads and give me suggestions and reports on how well those things are working. And then he's also the one that I have doing the cron job for the daily briefs, going out and collecting all that information and then providing the daily briefs. And then I'm reviewing those in the morning before, and I physically click the buttons to publish those and also send out emails, so I don't have an agent going off and randomly emailing people. It's the system I have set up right now is pretty solid, so I actually have been considering just fully automating that, because there are some mornings when I wake up and then I have children and things get busy, and then I end up not getting to post that content until later than I would like to, because I do like to have the content out in the morning in case somebody wants to read it with their morning coffee, for example. And I tend to be a little bit late on that, I would say. But with that said, the system initially I was finding some errors with the content and that, and after just prompting back and forth, I've got it to a place where I feel like it's pretty solid. And so with that said, I've been considering fully automating that. But here's another thing that I've been doing is I split out this kind of like founder brief or founder improvement ideas. Like one of the things I've heard multiple people do, and I was just kind of playing with the ideas, like, give me 3 things every morning that you can do to make my stuff better. And so I haven't read these ones this morning, so I don't even know what they are. But replay index as an indent magnet, and so it's going to say the timing replay index is more than an archive. This is the thing that I just showed this morning, where they had, and this was one of the things that Aries had suggested to me, is providing filters on the individual briefs so that somebody who might be interested in certain aspects related, since a lot of the stuff I do is related to GAN type things, they might want to just filter the briefs just on that and then read some of the historical briefs just to see how they come out. And so I'm not going to read through all of this, but it's saying, hey, we just did that, so here's some other things that we could probably put on there. Now, I probably only take about 20%, if that, of what it recommends. Initially, I was taking a lot of it because I thought it was doing a lot of novel things. And then some of it's just kind of got watered down or repetitive. And so with that said, I might just come back to some of these and say, hey, you know what, I need to redo some of this stuff. So I'll prompt it to do better. And I've done that with the GAN lessons, for example. The GAN lessons in the briefs started getting very repetitive. And so I told it to put like a filter on itself, make sure that it's not repeating itself over the briefs. And so review the last few briefs and make sure that you're not giving the same information. Now, that's probably not a perfect fix because after a month, it could end up doing something that's fairly repetitive. And I've kind of caught that over the time recently, that after probably 3 or 4 weeks, some of the content is still somewhat repetitive, but there's only so much GAN stuff available that the agent's going to be able to go out and find. And so I might start trying to prompt for specific aspects like, hey, let's start doing GAN lessons related to this and do that for a little while. That's something I contemplated, but I just haven't prompted to my agent to try and update yet. So, yeah, this one's talking about thumbnails because I did some recent updates to the Click Alchemy. I found a bug and I fixed it. And then I also did the title updates, right? And so that's actually doing the title updates, introduced a bug that was not caught by myself, and the watermarks weren't being present, or the watermarks were being present, but it was breaking some of the thumbnail renderings. And so I fixed that. So it's going to suggest some other options there. And then when the daily brief runs, I get a snapshot in here, but I don't really read. I used to read these all the time because this is really where it would mainly come to. But now I built an infrastructure on my website to be able to do it there. So that's where I do it there. So that's a little bit overkill, I guess, just in terms of the detail here. But I've been using this, and again, I don't think it does take some technical know-how to be able to set these up. Setting up a Discord bot to get your Hermes agents working in here is actually pretty quick once you've done it once, but it does take a little bit of configuration. And so I think I'll link one of my old videos. It's one of the first videos I did about how to create a Discord bot. It's not going to be in the context of setting up a Hermes agent, but once you set up a bot once, the steps to setting up a bot are relatively similar. And so just based on the permissions that you want to give your agent, then you can use those same the same flow. You're just going to change the permissions based on what you want your agent to have inside your Discord channel. And so the last thing that I will touch on here is using this with other individuals. And so this is something that I've been playing with recently that I have not fully done yet, but because I'm effectively a team of one for my own business here, even though I work with other people for other products like Eric or Revan or Crown or Revan. And so speaking of which, Revan has had a recent issue. For those who know, Eric mentioned this, or Crown mentioned this. So, if you guys are into praying or anything like that, you should shoot out some prayers his way. I think he's okay. Everything is fine for him, but he did have a pretty serious issue come up recently. I won't go into the details. Eric mentioned it. I didn't ask Revan for permission, so I'm not going to go ahead and disclose any of that there, but I just wanted to give you a heads up. If you don't hear from him and you are trying to get some attention through him through Discord, he still seemed responsive, but just a heads up, he's got some stuff that he's kind of working through right now. But with that said, I don't have anybody in this Discord channel that I'm communicating with. So back to the point. So I do think it would be very powerful to have give other individuals access to be able to do things. And so one thing that I mentioned that I was working on recently was a redesign of the UCount campaign website. I don't have it up right now, but the UCount campaign website is an organization that fights against human trafficking. It's something that I did just as a voluntary effort to work through redesigning their site. And so they have their site in Wix. Personally, trying to do something in Wix is there's similarities to doing something like in WordPress, where you're just dragging and dropping everything. It's not the way that I code, right? I'm a custom website builder. I've done that for 20 years, and that's my forte. I've done a lot of stuff with WordPress in the past, but my whole point about that is with AI agents nowadays, it's not as seamless trying to do things that way. Wix does have like AI things integrated into their editor flow, but it's not as simple as what you might do with Claude, where you say, hey, I have an e-commerce site, I want to redesign it, or I want to redesign the landing page, go do it, right? And maybe give it some brand concepts or a brand skill or something like that, and then it would go and redesign, and then you iterate that way. And so because that is a little bit more of a technical setup, there's a little bit of a transition there. And so the team that I'm working with there, when they want to change things, it's not necessarily always going to be as easy as it used to be for them to just go in and drag and drop stuff in Wix. They actually, if it's content changes, are relatively easy, but if they need to make design changes because the website is, in the way I have things set up now, are abstracted out, and we essentially use Wix as a headless CMS type of environment. I've been considering adding them to this Discord channel for specifically the UCount one, which is the channel I've used to do some of that redesign work. And then they could prompt the agent. I don't have to prompt the agent. Again, I still have controls around that where it doesn't just push code out to production, but it does go out, create a preview URL. They would be able to review the preview and see if the agent did what they wanted to. And if not, they could just ask the agent to fix it. And then when everything's good, it kind of puts the powers back in their hands. One of the things that I do like about that, there's an educational aspect to that where you're kind of pulling people forward into the future who might not use AI beyond asking GPT or Claude some questions through their web interface. It's really showing people some of the power that you can do with AI, and hopefully taking away some of the fear that I've heard a lot of people talking about lately of being afraid of AI is going to take our jobs. And I totally disagree with that. I think AI has essentially been somewhat of the superpower. I mean, it is possible to have some kind of a dystopian future, or potentially, as Elon has mentioned, a utopian future, and where AI is doing all these things and we just have all this free time. I've talked about this with some of my friends. I think if that were to happen, I'm on a bit of a tangent here, so I'll stop after this. But if that were to happen, I kind of have this idea that you would have like the one person in the neighborhood that goes to the warehouse to operate all the AI around a particular business, and they're just like the overseers of the AIs and helping make sure the AI is doing what they're doing. Everybody else in the neighborhood, what do? Well, they garden and they help each other out, doing stuff around their house, just things like hobby things potentially. And maybe that makes for better communities. I don't know. That would be a positive outlook, I would guess, but not everybody has that same view. So that was a little bit off the wall from the general content here, but everybody has their opinion about how that's gonna turn out. So that's gonna be it for now. I will just mention quickly, I kind of wanted to mention this in the beginning, but I didn't want it to get the video to get, I didn't want to get distracted in the video about this. I did go ahead and I made 2 videos around the editors that I prefer, the Gen 3 editors, and my preferences. The videos did not come out well. The first one that I did was on the same system I'm using right now. I did T3 code and cursor agents. I believe before it was called Cursor Glass, but now they're calling it Cursor Agents. And so I did those, and the video was about about an hour and 15 minutes. So it was over an hour. The last half of that entire video, I did not catch that the Cursor Agents window, for whatever reason, was not rendering properly in OBS. And so from a demonstration standpoint, that it was pointless, useless. I mean, it would have just been me talking about things that nobody can actually see change. I did get updates into Click Alchemy. They were not as refined as I wanted them to be, and so I would have come back to do more prompting to finish that. I did the Codex one on Windows, and then I found out using Codex on Windows, even though they had just released that, there was some issues with that as well. And so I ended up having to I ended up doing some minor video editing to splice it in, and then later found out that the other video was broken. And so what I'm going to do with the Gen 3 editors and demoing those, I'm just going to jump to the original platform that they were written for. And in my basic testing so far, there's been 0 issues with using them on those platforms. And so that's on a Mac platform. And problem is I didn't have the platform set up for recording or demoing. And so I did what I ended up mostly doing. I'm not completely done yet, but I'm working through what I didn't want to do originally, which is setting up all three IDEs on a single environment in Mac. It was actually quite easy, so I'm not worried about that. And they work, which is the bigger thing, because I was like, I'll do it on Windows, and I tried to do it on Windows, but the fact that Cursor was broke, or the Codex app was broke using one of the way that I like to develop. I even tried doing the native way, and it was still broken in some contexts, or I think it was Cursor app that was broken for some contexts. And so I was like, these just aren't working. So I'm just going to redo the whole thing in Mac. And then that way there should be 0 issues, and I will be able to get the ultimate point across, which is an overview of all these editors and see which each one kind of differs, how each one differs. And so that video will be coming. As I mentioned, I had already done it, and then I just had to scrap them. So hasn't fallen off my radar, but that will be coming soon. It was kind of a fun thing to do. And then I think also based on the outputs that I got before, I'll probably update that a little bit too. So hopefully it'll be a little bit more fit and finish as soon as I get done, and I won't have to do prompting afterwards to end up with a final end result. So if you are still interested in seeing that, stay tuned. That will be coming soon. And that will be it for today. Peace, Quanta.